Nicole Auerbach has a report out that they are the Big Ten and Tony Petitti weighing possible disciplinary action for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan football right now.
Yeah, Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic post on X. Officials expect resolution by the middle of the week as Tony Petitti mulls action. Sources say Michigan could take legal action if the Big Ten attempts to suspend Jim Harbaugh indefinitely before the conclusion of the NCAA investigation. This is going to be the out from Tony Petitti. He has set the ball up on the tee. Mary Ball's missing in, everyone. Ball's up on the tee, where he has already said in a conference call, I don't want to spend Thanksgiving holiday in a courtroom. This is going to be their out.
Well, but
they're going to say that they are threatening legal action if we do anything above 2 games. We've already had the report last week that the basically the compromise could be 2-game suspension,
which is just the standard sportsmanship violation. It's 2 games and then a $10,000 fine. But here's also why I agree with Tony Petitti. I wouldn't want to do that either over Thanksgiving, because if you're in a courtroom, it's no different than waiting on the NCAA at that point.
Yeah.
Because it's just business as usual until you resolve that within the suit, that the legal action that would be filed from Michigan's stance. And you're back in the same scenario that we're in right now, where if you want disciplinary action to come about and you've seen enough to act, you don't want to have to act after the season is concluded and after the college football playoff. That would be why I wouldn't want to spend Thanksgiving in the courtroom. But beyond that, Chad, I think he's got to do more than just the standard disciplinary action, and here's why. Because it wouldn't be Tony Petitti holding and being the judge, jury, and executioner. It would go before the committee, the Big Ten committee, if it's more than just the standard violation. And then they would approve it. They could reduce it. They could keep it the same. They could say, no disciplinary action at all. It's just a standard punishment. But it would be more than Petitti laying down the hammer. And I think that means more than just one commissioner doing this on his sole authority, which he can do if it's just the standard sportsmanship violation. I think if he does more than 2 games, he does that because it will be the entire conference, other than Michigan, pushing it that way, not just him.
Yeah, it's a real opportunity for Tony Petitti to show some teeth in this role. But in showing some teeth, he's probably going to get sued by Michigan. So it's a tough dilemma for him. I can understand that. I've said throughout, it needs to be 13 against 1. And they all need to be very loud about it and very authoritative about what they want done to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. If he's got support of every other member institution of the Big Ten, then he can act. The problem is in acting, if it's something that goes above and beyond what's normal, Michigan's just going to sue. There's going to be some sort of injunction. They're going to continue to play. Here's what needs to happen for all of Michigan's rivals. Someone's got to do the Lord's work here. They got to beat them. They got to beat them on the field.
Yeah, you can't sit out.
They're not stealing your signs anymore. That's stopped. Conor Stallions is gone. You've all changed your signals. Penn State needs to beat them this weekend. Ohio State needs to beat them. If you're really that pissed off at Jim Harbaugh, what's becoming the truth in this matter is you got to knock him out of the college football playoff on your own. And there's 2 chances to do that. In Happy Valley on Saturday and against Ohio State at the end of the year. That's really it. If not, they're going to be playing in the college football playoff again. What also needs to happen ultimately to Michigan is Jim Harbaugh is no longer the coach at Michigan. Whether that be him admitting the NCAA problem is going to be a big problem for him and bolting for an NFL job, or Michigan firing him at the end of the year.
That doesn't sound like they're doing
I'm looking at this from the rival's perspective. That's what you want to happen. But Hutton, I agree with you. Based on what Santa Ono is emailing the conference, and that they're continuing to talk about contracts and different things, I don't think he's going anywhere.
And that was from the Wolverine last week, which we'll have more coming up with Clayton Sayfie. And also this, keep in mind, the suspension itself is game day. What they agreed to earlier this year, the 3-game self-imposed suspension, he only was out on Saturday. He coached during the week.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other part about this. If it's based on what Nicole Auerbach is saying, if it's an indefinite suspension, to me, I take that as you're not back until we hear from the NCAA.
Yeah, you're just done coaching.
Yeah, and that's where it sounds like Michigan would have a huge issue with. because they're on the opposite end of it. If they're opening back up, they wanted it done before the Purdue weekend. The contract signed, sealed, and delivered, and apparently it wasn't going to happen that quickly. So which comes first, a Big Ten decision, or they double down and sign him to an extension before we even hear from the commissioner?
I think that'd be so stupid, but
they're already doing
the
it
way
to the
Michigan
NCAA,
has
though,
talked
right?
during some of this,
I know.
I would not put it past them that they sign him to something.
You have Stallions, who resigns for being a distraction. Apparently wasn't a distraction for the Michigan State week, but he was for Purdue. Practically the same result. And then the attorney through Stallions says Harbaugh and coaching staff had no idea the depths that we were going, or I was going. I say we because it's more than Conor Stallions, Chad. Common sense tells you, if you look at the records that were leaked to the Washington Post, which is what Michigan has an issue with, based on the assumption that Ohio State has connections, Ryan Day has connections to the private investigation firm. If you believe that he had all of these tickets and he's just flippantly asking some random fan at Vandy in Nashville to go and potentially scout Tennessee and doesn't know him, just says, hey, give me the signs, and absolutely not. Number one, you want to trust someone that you're getting the right signal and you're getting the right intel if you're just doing this behind the scenes and undercover. And number two, you need to keep your mouth shut, like Conor Stallions is doing through his attorney right now. So this is layered, and it's more than just one guy taking the fall, even though it's one guy taking the fall. This is intricate. And by the way, that never happened, the Vanderbilt Tennessee scout fan, because Tennessee ultimately ended up losing to South Carolina. So they weren't in the way anymore.
I don't know that it was a fan, by the way. I think it was it's a connection, a network of coaches or former coaches. But one of the guys that went on the record is a former D3 head coach that was a friend of Conor Stallions.
But not a current coach employed by said school.
So, but someone that knows football.
Sure.
Yeah, that can go and watch.
But again, like if you're doing that with the former coaches, how do your current coaches not know what you're doing?
Well, of course they do. But here's what
there's more. It's more than just one guy representing all of it.
Let me go on my conspiracy theory brain here a little bit on this. Conor Stallions resigned when he got the money right from whoever's paying him. There's a vast NIL program at Michigan. There's a lot of deep-pocketed boosters. This guy is not going to give the NCAA or anyone else anything other than Conor Stallions, did all of this on my own. I orchestrated the whole deal. Jim Harbaugh and the coordinators knew nothing about it. I lied to them and told them that I got these signs just by watching the game live, and that when I'm giving them information, they knew nothing about me going to other games. I did it all on my own. They've got lawyers writing out what Conor Stallions needs to say in a court of law or to NCAA investigators, and he's getting paid to do so. That's my big conspiracy brain working. But I think it took that long just to get the money right for him to never turn state's witness and for him to get paid to be the fall guy in all of this. Now, it is on the NCAA and the Big Ten and America to use your brains and figure out if you buy that or not, whatever he's selling. And we'll talk with Clayton Safey a little bit to ask.
Yeah.
One question I'm at, do they expect people to believe this? What they're selling in this release about his resignation? Is this the plan that everybody's going to buy, that they knew nothing?
And do you think it's just random that he's lawyered up with the guy that represented Manziel in 2013 against the NCAA and it resulted in a 2-quarter suspension?
Oh.
That's not random either.
Nope.
It's smart, by the way. That's what I look at it from. He's keeping his mouth shut. He's resigned. Chad, I'm with you on the money and getting the money right, on the idea and the common sense play there. And just the detail of he can't be the only guy that's getting the info. And then once you distribute that information, you're not going to ask questions about how the coaches are receiving it?
No, look,
of course they are.
And Michigan's helping him with all the legal fees,
of course,
lawyers to hire and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All of it. Behind the scenes.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, he's getting Central Michigan issued apparel.
Yeah. Now, Central Michigan may be getting paid off, too. They've gone remarkably silent on who that was in the sideline. After they announced
that investigation's still going, too.
They announced the launch of an investigation, but we haven't heard a follow-up from the AD on that investigation.
The Big Ten has notified Michigan that they could be handing down penalties through Commissioner Tony Petitti, and details about what that could include. And from the Michigan side of things, how they are lawyering up and preparing for their rebuttal in court, a possible lawsuit based on what the suspension could be and what the penalties could entail. Just reading through a number of details, the penalties range from just the reprimand, which we have referenced, which is like a $10,000 fine, and could be up to 2 games of a suspension for violating the sportsmanship policy for the Big Ten, and a wider range of potential penalties and discipline, including withholding TV, a bowl game and bowl game revenue from Michigan, and among other things, a suspension, of course, which would be punishment for Jim Harbaugh. Chad, this is from the visual, from the optics of things for me. Right now across college football, there is no one true leader, unless you want to tongue-in-cheek say it's the networks, which I will agree with. But we have 2 big voices, the Big Ten and the SEC. Right now, Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, I would refer to as the most powerful person in college sports. He's on a lot of boards. His voice carries weight. The rest of the conferences typically just sit back and respond to what he says and follow the lead of what the Southeastern Conference is doing. They are strategically not saying very much right now in regards to all of the allegations and all the evidence for Conor Stallions and what Jim Harbaugh and Michigan's football program knew or did not know. Strategically, because if the Big Ten, Chad, comes up and says, hey, here's the discipline, we're going to lay the hammer down, hypothetically, and say, hey, we're not going to want Michigan in the college football playoff. That benefits Greg Sankey because there's a greater potential for 2 SEC programs to get in. Again, it's about the revenue and the optics. But it's also that for Tony Petitti, because when no one's wanting to step up and lead, even from NIL, or we see the split from from what we see right now with the Power 5 to a Power 4, where's the super conference? When does that happen? Realignment. There's no one true voice. It's really 2 conferences and the networks. We know it's not the NCAA. Tony Petitti has a chance, though, to send a message and be the only person willing to really put a face and a name behind it and say, I'm here, I'm leading, I want to do things the right way. And even though it's involving my conference and one of my member institutions, and it's going to affect all the member institutions monetarily, if you leave Michigan out of the college football playoff because you're going to suspend Jim Harbaugh, who Michigan wants to extend, not get rid of, we're doing this anyway. And we're going to do more than just talk about helmet communication and how this is going to be the path towards that. And we're going to do it now because the NCAA doesn't have the leadership available to actually put forth a violation, discipline, and punishment in time for this to go into effect for this program this year, and instead would be retroactively going back and removing a banner potentially, or just saying, hey, we're going to punish you now instead of then, because it just takes time. They have an opportunity, and specifically Petitti, to follow me now, follow the flag. And I think a lot of institutions, many presidents, chancellors, ADs, are looking for that leader. And Petitti could lead the charge in this by doing this to one of his own instead of voicing a complaint about the big brother also down the street in the SEC, which is what Kevin Warren would do.
Yeah, and I think the fear of lawsuits is what's driving a lot of this. This is not action out of leadership or being proactive. There's a lot of thought coming out of fear of what is Michigan going to do if we decide to act now. And Hunt, you're right about this. The one way to truly affect Michigan is to affect their season right now, whether that be an indefinite suspension of Jim Harbaugh, whether that be them somehow being removed from the Big Ten championship, whatever that is. It's getting to them right now and not waiting for the NCAA to complete their investigation and have something happen to student athletes and coaches 4 or 5 years from now that have nothing to do with what's happened with Michigan. So what has the Michigan response been to all this? They're not denying it. No one's saying that wasn't Conor Stallions, the Central Michigan game in Central Michigan gear. Conor Stallions, I'm guessing he's getting paid to do so, but he's being very quiet, and he resigned his position. And while he resigned his position, he put out a statement saying, I was the only one who knew about it. Coaches didn't know anything about it. This was all me. So he's the fall guy for Michigan. Next step for Michigan, get all of your blogs on your side, okay? The Wolverine, others, they're carrying water for their university right now they cover, right?
Check
all
mark.
of them are on their side. There was a report out that Ryan Day's family was behind it. That report has been refuted by the NCAA, saying there's absolutely no evidence of any of that now. So everything that the Michigan Athletic Department has pitched to them has been reported by their own media, and we know how the game works, trying to protect their school for access they get to Michigan and everything else. That's how it works when you're covering one program and one team. Carrying the water for Michigan hasn't quite worked. The latest effort by Michigan is something that's been reported on by Pat Forty of Sports Illustrated and now some others, that here is this anonymous staffer of another Big Ten school from a year ago. I'm guessing this anonymous staffer no longer works for said Big Ten school. Either he was fired or moved on to another program. But whoever the hell it is, they're not putting their name behind any of it. And they have now circulated, and you can go read about it. Sports Illustrated has it redacted, but here are Michigan signs that were taken by other Big Ten schools and circulated across the Big Ten. Now, the Sports Illustrated story from Pat Forty does a good job of laying this out. Sign stealing is not illegal, okay? Going off-site and trying to steal signs electronically, scouting off-site, regardless, illegal within the NCAA. Scouting off-site and using electronic devices to do so, also illegal. So now Michigan's counter to all this is, we're not denying what we did was really bad, but guys, we caught wind a year ago of this circulating amongst Big Ten programs where they had our sign. So our response was just, we're doing it better and more involved, and we're skirting all the rules in doing so. But they're doing it too. This is a weird counter from Michigan over and over again. The NCAA's got them. The Big Ten's got them. Their first response was, yeah, we did it, but look who turned us in. Look who's behind it. Now the response is, yeah, we did it, but everyone still signs and everyone shares information across the league. I don't think any of this is going to help them ultimately with the NCAA, which brings us back to the question that Hutton has raised and we've talked about on this show. Tony Petitti is the one who can act on this. I am very curious to see this as one of his first big moves as Big Ten commissioner, how he handles this and what type of authority and strength he shows. Is he going to do what all 13 other member institutions want him to do, or is he going to cower behind the threat of a lawsuit? Because what's the third piece of this that Michigan is pushing on the media? If you do something above and beyond, we will sue. We have our legal representation ready to sue you and get an injunction to stop whatever you're doing. Is Tony Petitti going to be afraid of that, or is he going to act and show some teeth here?
I think it's more about the injunction part of the lawsuit than the actual lawsuit itself. Because, again, I think the time frame of why they want this done now as opposed to later is strictly based on Harbaugh's team now, and specifically what he knew and what he didn't know. What Dan Dockich tweeted out last night has resonated with me, because I think if you're Tony Petitti and you're going to hand down discipline, you're going to know more than what we know currently, publicly. And you're going to weigh that evidence, and there has to be something about the connection to Jim Harbaugh that Michigan believes no one has, even them maybe. They don't have evidence of this. But Dockich tweeted out yesterday, according to Big Ten coaches I've spoken to, there is so much evidence of Harbaugh and staff cheating that, quote, he should get a 10-year show cause, end quote. That would have been relayed to the commissioner in that meeting last week, and then potentially relayed to Michigan when he met with them in person, 24 to 40 hours later on campus in Ann Arbor. And now the notice comes about there could be discipline and penalties coming based on what has happened here. And aside from everyone's doing it, this is more than just, okay, he's looking into signs. The guy is on the sideline the day before Michigan season opener for Central Michigan in CMU gear, where the head coach of Central Michigan is connected to the Michigan coaching staff. You can't sit there and say, and oh, by the way, on the opposite sideline of another member school, Michigan State. You can't sit there and say, well, everyone's doing it, when it's blatant and obvious that you have a staffer who is connected to Harbaugh, but everyone says isn't allowed to actually speak the truth of what he's found, and it can't go to Harbaugh, but it goes to other people who Harbaugh would certainly know what the game plan is and what to expect, that it doesn't go all the way to the top, the Don of Michigan football, the Michigan man. Chad, that's where the layers of the detail that Petitti must have here to have the full support of the committee that will approve the discipline. That's more heavy-handed than what we publicly know right now, which is it's Conor Stallions, and even he and his lawyers saying that Harbaugh had no idea the depths of this. But this has gone. Other schools have known the depths of this because TCU was notified by multiple coaches that, hey, they've got your signs. It's the greatest sign-stealing scheme in the history of the world. Change your signs over the next 37 days before you play them in the college football playoff. We know how that game turned out. So if Harbaugh didn't know about Stallions on September 1st, the season opener for Michigan State and Central Michigan, but the other programs were chatting about this in January, there's got to be more info that the coaches and ADs and administrators have relayed to the commissioner to have the support and the backing of whatever discipline he's about to hand down. And it's got to be more than the standard 2 games, $10,000 fine, and we did what we could because the NCAA won't. That's not good enough if you're going to do it at the level that Petitti's allowing us to speak on, which is the Big Ten stepping in because the NCAA doesn't really have much authority because they sit back and wait, and they're actually scared of the monetary lawsuit, not an injunction.
Yeah, it's also funny to me. We're getting a lot of blowback from Michigan people in the chat.
Sure.
And this is good. This is good spirited conversation, debate, everything. And this is why we love college sports, right? We are emotional about our teams, okay? And we defend them at all costs, and I get that. Jake, who's clearly a big Michigan guy, he says, everyone's cheating, everyone should be punished. And I responded and said, stealing signs is not technically illegal. Going off-site and using electronic devices to steal signs is absolutely illegal. So unless you have proof of other programs doing exactly what Michigan did, it's not the same. And he comes back and says, I never said that, but sharing signs per the Big Ten policy is breaking the sportsmanship policy. Why aren't you talking about that? Jake and everyone else that's a Michigan person has been screaming at us and Dan and everybody else at OutKick or whoever else. By the way, not everyone at OutKick shares his opinion. Clay thinks everything's fine. Okay? So if you're a Michigan person, you're going to love Clay's opinion because he thinks nothing's going to happen. They're going to Cam Newton this thing out, and they're going to sue the NCAA if they do anything, and they're going to be fine. So you're going to like his opinion on this. You're probably not going to like our opinion on this, or at least mine. I can speak for myself on this. And
if you're scared of the lawsuit, to me, it's just the injunction that's going to allow things to play out anyway.
Well, let me get into this allegation, okay? The Michigan people that are screaming at us saying, let all the facts come out. Where's your proof? Where's it that? When we're showing you videos, we're showing you photos, we're showing you all these different things, tickets purchased, all of this evidence, are now coming back and saying, why aren't you talking about that one anonymous former Big Ten staffer that no one knows who he is that sent in a redacted photo of a play sheet claiming they shared it with the entire Big Ten without any digital trace that it actually happened? We don't have that yet. There's not proof of that. So which way do you want it? You want us to not talk about it when there's mountains of evidence against Michigan, but yet you want us to say, hey, wait on all the evidence, but on this one, let's go ahead and act like it's gospel. Not going to do it. The Big Ten is waiting. This report from earlier today, I know that
the timetable, they're waiting on a response from Michigan, who has an opportunity to present their case as to why they shouldn't be punished from the conference.
Right. They gave basically the notice of allegations. Here's the notice of the penalty, the sportsmanship policy. So now you had, when they gave it to them, you have until Wednesday afternoon or whatever the time is to respond to it. But then a part of the report is the Big Ten is not going to immediately respond. They're going to process what Michigan says in response. Now, I don't think there's any mistaking the fact that suddenly these reports come out yesterday of what Michigan handed the Big Ten office and Tony Petitti in regards to Ohio State and Rutgers sharing information on their signals with Purdue before last year's Big Ten championship game. Everyone's saying that's not going to factor into the Big Ten's decision. I think that it does, quite frankly, only because Tony Petitti may have been blind to other people trying to steal signs. Does not change the fact that the way Michigan did it is in direct violation of NCAA rules. Now, Tony Petitti could come back and say, hey, this is pretty foolproof evidence we got also of what the other coaches were doing against Michigan. So we're going to make it a one-game suspension now for Harbaugh and back off a little bit and then let the NCAA handle the whole Conor Stallions situation. I don't know, but Hutton, I expect movement today, that we're going to hear something in this news cycle today on what is the punishment for Jim Harbaugh.
Dan Wetzel with a column with Yahoo, and it had to do with the idea that one is a blue-collar crime and one is a white-collar crime. Violation, penalty coming, whatever. The white-collar crime being Purdue giving signals to Rutgers and Ohio State. The blue-collar, of course, being Conor Stallions and what we're seeing. And also the fact that it's Jim Harbaugh and it's whether or not he knew and what you can prove and what you can't. But Wetzel is, in his column in the mailbag that he wrote, his stance is both are against what the NCAA rule states about outside scouting and whether or not if you're pointing to getting it from the outside and learning about the signs and not having to decipher things by a fan or a scout on the road, that still is a competitive advantage if that's what you're saying from the NCAA stance. And it certainly would be in violation of quote-unquote sportsmanship, but which is what is the policy that the Big Ten is going to govern under, not the NCAA rule per se. And perception is that what Michigan is doing is far worse. But, Chad, isn't it also about what you can and can't prove if you're Tony Petitti?
Well, so Dan Wetzel's column is really, really good, and I think it certainly makes you think about all of it. Well thought out. And his argument is this. It's not that it's the same NCAA violation that's gone on here. He's saying we're talking about different means to get to the same endpoint.
Right.
So where one is a smash and grab is how he describes it. That's Conor Stallions going in and invading and being on the sideline and buying tickets and using a cell phone footage. That's a smash and grab. That's a blue-collar crime versus the white-collar crime of an organization of coaches in the conference doing it and then presenting that to another team.
In advance.
I get what he's saying here, but here's where I take issue with the column. He says it's both forms of advanced scouting that is not legal, right? That's not true. Advanced scouting is legal. Off-site scouting is not legal. Now, if Michigan can prove that they were doing this off-site with people in the building and filming it, and then they're compiling their info that way, that's one thing. Now, is it a gray area? Sure. That Greg Schiano likes Ohio State and hates Michigan, so he's going to hand over the signs to Purdue because he wants Michigan to lose, and he's going to do this with Ohio State in conjunction with them, where each side has one defense and offensive signals. Yeah, there's a gray area there for sure. But let's look specifically at the rules. And I jotted this note down because Dan wrote, they're both forms of advanced scouting. However you look at it. Advanced scouting is fine. You can look at the All-22. You can look at television footage. You can watch it during the game. You can have one guy, just like you got a quarterback spy with a linebacker on a mobile quarterback. You can have one guy looking on the other sideline on your staff that's specifically looking at the signs, trying to decipher them during the game. That's not expressly prohibited within the NCAA rules. What Conor Stallions did is. So I get the whole gist of it. Hey, we got to the same endpoint. One team did it one way, the other teams did it another way. That's fine if you want to legislate it that way. But the main issue here, and this is what other coaches are saying, is that what Michigan did is unfounded. Teams don't do that. And I do think, Hutton, there is a level of violation here. And I'm not talking about NCAA rulebook violation. I'm talking about programs feeling violated. That a member of the Michigan staff is on a sideline wearing another team's gear to scout a rival, or is buying up a ticket and sitting in the stands filming while his team's playing somewhere else. Now, look, that's just me talking. I get what Wetzel's saying. But if I'm a program, I feel more personally violated with someone in my building doing that as opposed to what we're talking about here. Here's the other thing. I don't know what the evidence is. All we get are the reports that they presented evidence that this happened. Rutgers would not comment. Ohio State did not respond for comment when asked to comment about these allegations from Michigan. I think this is all coming to a head today. We're going to learn something getting ready for this Michigan-Penn State game on Saturday.
That's already been presented to Petitti last week when Michigan turned this over based on an unnamed former Big Ten staff member that gave this back to Michigan. But also keep in mind, like, the gray area, I'm not debating the gray area of, to me, there's a definitive rule about off-site scouting in advance. What we're doing with the Big Ten, though, and what Petitti has notified Michigan about, is the sportsmanship policy. And it states two very different things. The sportsmanship policy that, in essence, they've notified Michigan they're prepared to hand down discipline about, and what they're going to respond to, says actions that are offensive to the integrity of the competition are punishable, and there's no appeal to it. So if you're Petitti, how do you handle this, given the fact that to this point, there's no hard evidence linking Harbaugh or, quite frankly, any other coach to what we were seeing from Conor Stallions? That's the difficult part that I think Petitti and the Big Ten have themselves in, because time is on the side of the NCAA, because they've always used that. It's always the back burner, and this is a process. This is the sped-up version of what no one's willing to wait around about from the Big Ten offices. But what they've also done is opened up this box for the sportsmanship policy, where we also, while on surface level, while you're not handing over signs, that would be exactly what Michigan's getting bashed about if, in fact, they handed over signs to South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right? This is the same thing. And also, that would fall under sportsmanship. What happened? What signs were given to Central Michigan, which didn't help them, by the way, in week one. 7-6, I believe, late in the second quarter, but didn't help them in the final scoreboard. But
were there signs handed over? We don't know. Maybe he was just doing that to scout Michigan State and not helping Central Michigan in that game.
Right.
That just gave him a good vantage point for it. We don't know.
But what we also don't know is how did Purdue get the signs, or how did they obtain that? Because the flip side of the argument that Michigan fans, or really anyone that says everyone's doing it, the flip side is everyone's doing it. They're just not doing it to the level that Conor Stallions is being stupid about. Keeping a track record and using his name on the different accounts for Venmo or whatever, and having the trail back to him specifically. The one thing they were extremely careful about is not linking anything to the head coach or the staff, for that matter, even though the guy is seen on the sideline standing next to the offensive and defensive coordinators, depending on who the opponent has on the field at the time. So that to me is the gray area that Petitti has now entered into, that if Michigan comes back with a harsh response saying, here's what we're doing and here's what we're going to threaten, if you're Tony Petitti, I like the fact that they've already put out there that they're going to wait and decipher how to react to what Michigan is about to respond with. But Chad, they're also admitting, like, we need to see what we're up against, and this isn't helping. And in fact, to this point, the news and the info and the reports that we know about have been through a private investigation firm, or it's been leaked based on contacts with TCU that say, oh yeah, we knew about this, coaches were calling us, whatever. If you're doing all that, but you don't have the hard evidence on Harbaugh, what do you really have, and what is Petitti acting on? Because to me, if you've got evidence that links Harbaugh, now is the time to put it out there, because if you don't, what really is going to happen other than an injunction? You need the hard evidence, just like we're seeing with Conor Stallions. And we don't have the hard evidence on the sign sharing that is being alleged for Ohio State, Rutgers, and Purdue. We also don't have that for Harbaugh right now. We don't have any hard evidence that, I mean, yes, he needs to be able to oversee and know about it, and we agree. He knew about it. But again, if sign sharing, Michigan has allegedly been doing that, this is the same thing that has also been alleged. And I don't know if you're the commissioner, if you're wading into those waters to open up the policy that is so vague, but you're also going to have to treat everyone on the same playing field. Well, it's a very unusual move.
Let's also keep in mind that this is not strike one for Jim Harbaugh with the NCAA and violating rules. This is like 2 or 3 down the line.
But it's the one that the Big Ten got involved with.
And the fact that they've had – well, my point is it's not – if you're Jim Harbaugh, you can't fall back on the we are Michigan men and men of integrity, and then we run our program with the utmost values of playing by the rules and keeping them in mind. You can't do that anymore. Yeah. The dude served a 3-game suspension this year, and now this. So I think you lose the plausible deniability part of it with that. Even if they can't link him directly to it because they did a good job and they were smart about not texting him about it. I mean, Jim Harbaugh can sit there and say, look, we had this guy there that was really good at picking up signs like everyone has, and he's telling us this. We didn't know how he was doing it, right? Or he could say, I didn't know. Maybe someone else did, but I didn't know. No one's going to buy that. And even if it's true, you lose the ability to go with that because of the previous crimes by Jim Harbaugh and the suspension he served and everything else. If this was a first strike and this was completely out of character for Jim Harbaugh and all that, okay, maybe more people are buying, hey, maybe this guy is just rogue and no one knew about it, even though he's right in the ear of the coordinators on the sideline on video during the games. But maybe no one knew how he was getting it. I think you lose the ability to use that excuse given what's gone on with the Michigan program.
But also, Petitti's not getting into this unless if he didn't hear the response that he heard on that meeting, on that video conference with the coaches, right? So are the coaches just not going to be up in arms over these allegations, right? If it's a violation of the sportsmanship policy, I mean, to me, it's a very weird circumstance now where if you act on this and you want to go heavy-handed, how heavy do you go considering that there's going to be more that continues to come out, not just with Michigan, but they're going to leak all kinds of stuff now based on feeling like everyone's out to get them and everyone else is acting like...
Yeah, if they've got any info, now's the time to leak it. They leaked that yesterday. Let me also say this, and this is what I want to know if I'm Tony Petitti. I want to get all the coaches together and say, do you really believe Jim Harbaugh is a cheater that is getting a competitive disadvantage and you want him punished for that reason? Or do you just really not like Jim Harbaugh? That's a very pointed question I'm asking everyone. Because Jim Harbaugh has never been the most likable of coaches amongst other coaches. So I want to get to the bottom of that. How much of this is he has gone above and beyond, he is cheating, he's violating the sportsmanship policy, he's affected the games against you, versus how much of it is Jim Harbaugh wins a lot and we don't like the guy because his personality is weird and he's not the nicest, friendliest dude to us. I don't know the answer to that.
What we do know,
but you got to get to the bottom of that too.
Petitti is the sole arbiter for what is offensive to the integrity of competition, as the sportsmanship policy states. Yeah. And he's reacting and going to meet with Michigan based on that video conference with coaches. What's the response from coaches based on these new reports that Michigan has surfacing?